Let me just give you, and I just got some thoughts here, and I want to share with y'all, because these are Christians, football players, football coaches. These are my favorite people in the world, are you people. I want to tell you just about the theology, the philosophy, the historicity of the phenomena of a coach, what a coach is. Stick with me here. In about 1920, there was a problem in American academia, and they called a meeting of college presidents. And the problem was that the phenomena of athletics was taking over academics, that they could tell that they were now building these things on the campuses called stadiums, and you could actually charge people to come. And they were putting 60,000 people in a stadium to watch what had been just kind of an intramural deal of college football play. And and now all of a sudden they were competing against each other, and they were giving what were known as scholarships, and they were actually recruiting young men to come and play. And a guy named Newt Rockne found out you could travel from South Bend all the way to LA, and he would stop all along the way, and every Catholic in America would come out and see Notre Dame football players. And so the bowl games were starting, and they just said, this is going to take over academia. And so they had a meeting as to what they should do to curtail college athletics. And Newt Rockne stood, and he said, this was after World War I, and he said, look, we have fought the war to end all wars, and as a result, we're not going to have the military. The country is moving from rural to urban. And so no more is a boy raised on a farm. And without the farm and the military, the only hope for a young man to become a man is athletics. And he said, we are the future priests and preachers of the youth of America are going to be coaches. And these academicians listened to him and realized that how far their jobs could go as academicians, it couldn't go as far as a coach. And so he swayed all of American academia to let this phenomena go that was taking place, that was called sport. And Rockne basically said that was prophetic. He said, sport is not going to stay sport. It's about to become something bigger than you have ever imagined. Well, he was right. And the reason that it was because of a demographic shift in the United States. Y'all have heard of the Industrial Revolution? The late 1800s, 1900s, America went from a rural to an urban setting. And started in the north, went down to the south, and everybody moved from the country to the city. And when that happened, you saw fathers that now left the home. Fathers were no longer in the home at the farm with the children. That fathers left the farm for the factories. And it was the first time in history that men got formally separated from their wives and families. And they would go put in 12 hours, and they would come home beat down. And as a result, a couple of things happened, is that child rearing now became a matriarchal pastime. That mothers now singularly were in charge for the rearing of that child. And as a result, the inculcating in a child religion and morality became the mother's job. The father's job was to beat the child when he came home, all right? And many of you men have come home with your wife with a kid like a trout on their own, and they said, beat the child, beat him unto the glory of God. But child rearing became matriarchal. And as a result, morality and Christianity became a woman's sport. Are you with me? It became a woman's sport. And the men surrendered. Their job was to suffer, to make money, to die young, let the wife take the insurance, marry a younger man, go to Cabo. Are you with me, Janice? Okay. That was her job. And the men's was simply to work. And as a result, God became the God of sissies. How many of you guys remember growing up with this? He became officially the God of the effeminate. And morality became something that women did, but men took pride in the antithesis of it. And that was masculinity, which was not Christ-likeness, but was pretty much brutality. That was where men found their meaning. If you ever read Mark Twain, young Tom Sawyer grieves about Aunt Becky. No, not Aunt Becky. Aunt Becky Thatcher was his girlfriend. Polly. That he said, Aunt Polly keeps trying to womanize me to get him into church. And that was the late 1800s that Twain wrote that. She's trying to womanize me. And so by the early 1900s, Christianity and holiness was a woman's sport. And as a result, a couple of things came out of that. The phenomena of saloons, that men would put in that workday and they would come home strung out. And so they would stop off and they would take a male sedative known as booze. They found out you could make whiskey quicker than you could make beer. Beer was a European phenomenon. Americans majored in whiskey, all right, because you could make it in like 6 hours. And then you go blind. But you had the saloons and the bars. As a matter of fact, there began in the early 1900s, because of this phenomenon of the saloons, to take men, to give them a male hangout, was there at the saloons. And y'all remember what was passed right before FDR, he got rid of it? Prohibition. And that was from a very real problem, because there was an enormous amount of drunkenness because of this phenomena of men that would go to the saloons. And so you started seeing men that became drunkards. And then you began to see the next phenomena of boys that became packed into the cities. And they were unattended. And they hit puberty. And they got away from mama. And you saw boys running loose. And what came out of that was the phenomena of the gangs. How many of you remember when you were little watching a show from the 1930s into the 1920s called Little Rascals? Yeah, everybody knew about our gang. See, you had the gangs. You remember the club that they were all members of? The He-Man Woman Haters Club. All right. You saw the gangs. You saw how many of you watched old 30s movies? Remember the Bowery Boys? Yeah, gangs of boys coming together to find an identity, because that was all that they had. They were out of the home. Mama couldn't hold them. Daddy was gone. God was not in their thinking anymore. And so you started seeing the peer pressure of gangs, and with that came truancy, and came delinquency, and came crime. And that cast the pall of the 20th century, of men alienated from God, the home, caught up in the job, mama trying to control the kids. And as a result, churches became matriarchal. The church is a patriarchal institution. The four metaphors of the church, that the Christian is a soldier, a farmer, he's an athlete, and he's an architect. Those are all male ideas. But the church became a matriarchal thing, and men simply didn't want to be associated. The bar, yes. The factory, yes. The mine, yes. But not the church and not the home. And so there began to be some solutions. They began up north to find an organization that started taking children, and on Sunday would hold classes for children to come and to study Bible. And they were taught by men and women, and they were called Sunday schools. I bet y'all thought that was in Matthew 6 somewhere. It's not. It's not. Neither is a Wednesday night service. Okay. But there were Sunday schools. And they found out that you didn't need professionals to do it. They found out the local church, it took off. And local churches said, we don't need this as a parachurch organization. We need to do this. As a matter of fact, y'all ever hear of a guy named Dwight Moody? He began his ministry in Chicago on Sundays when the bars would shut down, that he would round up boys and take them to bars that had shut down and have Sunday school. And out of that grew another organization called the Young Men's Christian Organization, the YMCA. And out of that came boys' clubs. Out of that came the YWCA. How many of you have ever heard of a Catholic priest named Father Flanagan? Looks a lot like Maxwell, if you've ever seen him. He looks like Maxwell. And Father Flanagan just went plumb to Omaha and said, I'm going to start my own community of just boys that nobody else will have. What was the name of it? Boys Town. You also saw something coming out of, with Baden-Powell out of England that took off in the United States. And it was called Boy Scouts. And it was taking ostracized boys that had no male role model and bringing them together. It's been said that one of the things that probably saved the strata of American society were 2 world wars, because it forced men to be under authority. Isn't that interesting? And it raised them a sense of patriotism. And then, you know what the other thing was, besides Sunday school, YMCA, Boys Club, Boys Town, Boy Scouts? Sports. That first baseball, then football, then track, then basketball. They all started, incidentally, in college. And they went down to high school and then went on to the pros, except for football. Baseball started with the pros first in city leagues, then went down to baseball in the high school. Are y'all with me so far? Okay. Okay. Well, sports, basically for 3 reasons, became the greatest. Sports and movies, Hollywood became the greatest cultural phenomena of the 20th century. Did y'all know that? It took over. And it was because sports gave young men, women followed later, but it was started as a therapy for young men. And it became an outlet that instead of beating people up, you could compete in athletics. And so it was an outlet. And you know why else it took off? Because you had to be under a coach. And it gave boys the opportunity to have a male build into their lives. They had to submit to authority. And a third reason was that sports became a microcosm, and that's what Newt Rockne said. He said, sports are a microcosm for a man. You know, it's true, isn't it, Tommy? It's a microcosm. I found that in my personal life, that as a high school athlete and a college athlete, that and I wouldn't say this, with anybody but us, okay, but I had a marked advantage over all of my peers, because from the time I was 8 years old, I had to submit to a coach in baseball, and then a coach in the 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th, 10, 11, 12, all the way through high school in football and baseball and basketball. And when it came to dreaming something, setting a goal, having incremental acts of discipline, negating how I felt to achieve a future desire and goal, that essential paradigm of life, I had pounded into me. How many times did you ever run a wind sprint and you got yelled at saying, don't quit? You ever remember that? Don't quit. Run through. Finish. Don't bend down. Stand up straight. Don't drink water. It's only 107. What were they thinking? All right? So I never figured that out. Yeah. Let's give them salt pills. That'll help them. Yeah. See, that's why you do coaches outreach. And so it was a microcosm of life. And you could take a kid, and if he could succeed as an athlete, he had a chance to succeed in life. Then you found out you could get an education from it. And it exploded in the United States, more than Europe, because America was used to conquering and competing. That's what America was proud of. We weren't a feudal society. You didn't get born into privilege. You had to suck it up, and you had to dig, and you had to reach to be something. Amen? You were just white trash like me, weren't you? And we had to fight to get where we wanted to be. And so in America, where conquest, competition, and achievement, pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, Sport was American. It was red, white, and blue. And another reason was it was democratic, in that everybody, once you walked on that playing field, it didn't matter whether you were a rich man or a poor man. Matter of fact, the poor guys could play a little better sometimes. They were hungry. And so everything leveled out on that football field. And that's why America, that was built on immigrants in the 1800s, guess what took off in the 1900s? Was sport. Because you had Jim Thorpe, you're voted the greatest athlete of the first half century. What was his background? Anybody remember? He's a Native American. He was a Sac Fox Indian, a direct descendant of Black Hawk. Was Jim, and he was from Shawnee, Oklahoma. Newt Rockne. If you know this, Maxwell's going to take you to Del Frisco and get you a steak. Newt Rockne was an immigrant. What country? Okay. He was from Oslo, Norway. Came to Chicago, learned the language. Went to Notre Dame, working as in the laundry, then as a chemistry professor. Babe Ruth was an Irish immigrant. How about Bronco Nagurski? You think he was from Highland Park? No. He was Lithuanian. I had a hero growing up. Steve, you played. He was a Czechoslovakian. He would have been from Bohemia. And there was a group of Protestants in Bohemia that stood against the incursions of Catholicism against the Hussites. And they were called the United Brethren, the Fratum Unitus. And guess who my hero was? It was John Unitas. He was a Czechoslovakian. He was a Bohemian. And so these guys in America, it took off because the immigrant had a chance to be something. And also, the biggest reason, though, is they found out you could make money. In America, if it makes money, we're onto it. And so all these immigrants could make quick money, fast money, and they could do it not by any privilege, but just by hard work. And you began to see the phenomena of the hero, the American hero. Up until this time, it was military men and it was politicians. Now it became actors and athletes. And the sports hero was clean cut, was hardworking. How many of you guys, when you were little, read books by Claire B? Anybody? Did you? Remember who the hero was? It was Chip Hilton. And he honored his mother. He was a good boy, and every kid read about Chip Hilton. And so the heroes came about. The point is that in America, sports and coaches weren't planned. They were extruded. They came out of the ground by pressure. They were phenomena that rose up. That was the athlete. They came from the pressure down below, and they met a need in our country for men to find role models, and later on for women. And like I say, I got shaped through coaches. I owed everything to coaches. Whenever Joe Namath got inducted into Canton, he was thanking all the people in his life until he got to Paul Bear Bryant. And then Namath broke down at this coach and his wife. Paul Bear Bryant said he would have gone to prison if it hadn't been for the high school coach at Fordyce, Arkansas, that took him. Bill Walton said he would have become a total freak from the 60s if it hadn't been for John Wooden. There's probably 10 guys from Grambling in the Pro Football Hall of Fame because of Eddie Robinson. And so it has been said that unless a kid today is military, farmer, or an athlete, he has probably never learned discipline. Stallings wouldn't let his daughter date a boy unless he was a football player. That's a fact. and she dated some darn French horn player or something like that. And he had to plead for the mercy of God for Gene to let him marry his daughter. And so a coach is a social phenomena. To this day, the only guys I ever see can stand up in a group of young men and say, take a knee. And they'll take a knee. Even I can't get them to do that. But a coach can do it. Take a knee. And they all take a knee. I was in this very room over here about 3 weeks ago when the Colts played the Cowboys, and I did the pregame for the Colts until they went out and got beat 40 points. Okay. And they have a quarterback coach named Clyde Christensen. He's had a coach's Bible study for like 17 years. Greatly affected Tony Dungy. And he would these guys would just collect around him. And I was amazed just at almost the priestly role that a coach has. And I think most of you coaches, would you agree that the reason that most coaches are coaches is because of coaches? That a coach almost has a missionary fervor when he gets into it. Vince Lombardi was going to be a Jesuit priest until he realized he could affect more people by coaching than he could by the priesthood. And basically the Green Bay Packers were the Jesuit way of doing things, clearly stated, bluntly set forth, and endlessly repeated. And that's how the Packers won their games. And so all this being said, that most coaches, I think, have a great deal of frustration because they never ever get to be what they had dreamed of being for two reasons. The continual struggle in being a coach. I know that most of you went into coaching for the big money. You teach home ec or something for $30,000 a year, and then they give you $2,000 for coaching. It's hard on your family. You move. You fight parents. You fight administration. You fight alumni. Bear Bryant said he always told his ex-players, don't become a coach unless you have to. Unless there is a dominant passion in you, don't do it. He said, if you can do anything else, do it. Do coaching almost like a mission call because you can't do anything else. I wouldn't have been a pastor. I'd have been a coach because those were the guys that affected me the most were my coaches. And the other reason that coaches struggle is because of loneliness. Coaches, can I get an amen? Coaches are an elite fraternity, and they're not sure who they can trust. And when you have other coaches, and when you have someone that comes in that can handle the Bible, coaches will open up to each other. And I think, Tommy, this is why a lot of coaches wither, because they don't have anyone to build into them, and they don't have anyone to give and take. Coaches outreach. When Tommy came to me and he said, I'm thinking about doing this, and we sat and listened. I sat and listened to him, and I said, that will work. It was kind of a blinding flash of the obvious. And I said, that will work. Coaches need coaches, and coaches need input, and they need guys to get alone with that know what they're going through, and they can get into higher things that affect their lives because they're all, like ducks. They're serene on the outside and they're pedaling like crazy underneath, just trying to stay afloat. And these guys need guys. And so coaches outreach gives them companionship, and it gives them a teacher, and it gives them trust where they can share their heart. And you got to remember, as you do coaches outreach, you don't look in the ministry, and I've been doing ministry for 40 years. There's what's called ministerial math. The ministry isn't 2 + 2 + 2 is 6. 2 + 2 + 2 is 10,000. Because God is able to do exceeding abundant beyond what we ask or think. Am I right? You don't know what God will do. I did one time an FCA coaches deal up in Estes Park. And there was a guy that got up that shared his testimony with all these coaches. And he read a paper of a player that wouldn't come back to play for him. because he claimed to be a coach and he kept cussing. And he had a division in his coaching that once he got on the field, he would cuss, and then he would act as a Christian off of it. And this player wrote him a letter and said, I'm not coming back because I'm not going to play for a semi-Christian that says he's a Christian. This coach got up and he read half that letter, and then he stopped and he wept. And I remember Grant Taft was the head guy, and he just said, I want to ask all of your apologies. And he asked the entire community of coaches, about 300 coaches, to forgive him. And I was just watching this. And I remember Grant came up and had everybody pray, and he assured him that all of us struggle. All of us struggle. And he said, by the grace of God, I'm never going to do that again. Well, I was teaching on Philippians 3. Forgetting what lies behind, reaching forward to what lies ahead, and press on to the goal. The next summer I saw him again, and that guy quoted Philippians 3 to me. And he had gotten to be dynamic. He was the head coach at the University of Colorado in the late 80s. Bill McCartney. And after that conference, he and a guy named Dave Wardell of the Colorado FCA, Dave got with me and he said, you know, these guys struggle because once they leave the conference, they don't have anybody during the year to keep them up. We're going to get a bunch of guys together and just hold each other accountable. Guess what that became? Became Promise Keeper. I saw Promise Keepers when it was an apology from Bill McCartney. That's all. 2 + 2 + 2 is 10,000. You don't know, Tommy, what's out here. You have no idea. I got saved when I was at North Texas, and like Tommy, I was in my bed reading philosophy, all right, trying to figure it out. And I think I was reading Peanuts. I don't think. And this guy came into my room, and he didn't know how empty I was. And he sat down with my roommate that was a defensive end from Houston, Cy Fair. And he started talking to my roommate about he just was going door to door. I'm Jerry Cook. I wonder if I could talk to you about, okay. Go to the next door. And for some reason, my roommate let him in. 6'7" guy named Rex. And I walked in, and Rex was in the bed, laying down on the bed, and Jerry had the chair turned around, and he was sitting there talking to him. And I walked in, and Rex said, it's Jerry. He's talking to me about God. I said, well, really? And I sat down on the bed and started listening over his shoulder. And he said to Rex, Rex, what are you? You a Christian? You a Buddhist? You a Baptist? You an atheist? What are you? He said, I'm a Christian, and I'm listening. And he said, and what is a Christian? What a rude question. He said, what is a Christian? And Rex gave him the answer that I thought was the answer. I grew up a good Methodist kid in Waco. It's a tough thing to be a Methodist in Waco, all right? Because it's like there's the graveyard of Methodist preachers, you know. Let's send him to die, boys. On to Waco. Well, I'm listening over this guy's shoulder, and he says to Rex, what is a Christian? And Rex gave him the answer that I thought. He said, it's somebody that keeps the 10 Commandments. He could have said a lot of things to Rex. He could have said to him, name them. We'd have been in trouble. He could have handed him a Bible and said, find them. We'd have really been in trouble. But all he did, and that's what I thought. How many of us thought that was how you got to heaven? You're going to, you earn your degree, you earn your everything, you're going to earn heaven. And he says to Rex, and you keep them? And Rex, just like the Bible says, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep. You might know the verse. Y'all ain't been, what are you going to do when you get to heaven and run into Habakkuk? All right? He says, hey, did you like that verse? Habakkuk 2, the Lord is in his holy temple, let all the earth keep silence. And Rex was silent. God has shut up all in disobedience that he might show mercy to all. He said, you keep them? You never lust for a woman? You never have disobeyed your parents? You've never lied? You've never coveted and wanted anything other than satisfaction with the person of God? And Rex was silent. And I was too. And then this guy, Jerry, my life hit a fissure right here. He said, Rex, The law of God wasn't given as rungs on a ladder that we could climb to save us. He said the Bible and the law was given as a mirror to show us our sin, to drive us to the fountain of the forgiveness from the crucifixion of Christ. He put Old and New Testament together. Just like old Prof walked you through the Bible, he took me Old and New Testament. And I sat up, and he said, this was why Jesus had to die for our not keeping the law. And it's why he rose from the dead, because he was perfect, because he did keep the law. So we take his righteousness, he takes our sin, and we stand before God with the righteousness that God's righteousness requires God to require. And God can save us. And I thought to myself, if that's not true, it ought to be. I was a quarterback, and I thought a little bit deeper than people. And I responded. I didn't respond right there because I knew I couldn't have Christ in me at the same time. One of us had to go. And about a month later, God just beat me down. That guy, a few years later, died of a virus in the brain that shared the gospel with me. His brother called me, and he said, could you call him? And I said, I sure will. And I called Jerry Cook in Van, Texas, and I said, let me tell you what God has done through Denton Bible. And I said, thank you for stopping by the room and sharing with my roommate. He never knew that I got saved by ricochet. You know. Never did. My roommate became a bouncer in a Houston topless bar. Then he became a lawyer, and he really did. He's a lawyer today. Frank, I apologize. McCullough, but that's fact. But that is ministerial math. Old Prof never realized what you were going to do when you stood there.